Very good evening, honored members of the faculty, distinguished guests, of course the vibrant assembly at UC Berkeley, and of course the students. It is a pleasure and honor to be back here. I've been here a couple of times, addressing students and faculty, engaging in very vigorous debate, some of the known contentious issues of our times. It's always a pleasure to be here. Traversing the grounds beneath the silent gaze of the towering Campanile, I am vividly reminded that here the fires of innovation, debate, and progress have burned brightly for generations. Berkeley represents more than a mere academic sanctuary. It is indeed a crucible where the visions of tomorrow are not just dreamt, but actively forged and refined. It is perhaps understandable if Malaysia's relations with the United States do not capture the same kind of attention as those involving China, Japan, or now the Philippines, because it's neither an alliance nor particularly contentious. It often seems as if the relationship is destined to hide in plain sight. But thinking so, that would be a disservice to the long years of collaboration and mutual respect that our two nations have built. And let me put this as plainly as I can. Malaysia regards its strategic relations with the United States as crucial to its economic vibrancy and national security interests. This position stems from an objective, rational, and perhaps utilitarian assessment of how best to serve Malaysia's needs on the world stage. The facts speak for themselves. The US ranks amongst our largest foreign investors, with over $100 billion pledged just this year across manufacturing, services, and digital sectors. And that's likely to undercount, as many US firms channel investments through subsidiaries across Asia and Europe. The US stands as Malaysia's third largest trading partner, while we are America's 17th largest export market. Defense and security cooperation represents a vital anchor for the broader relationship. Malaysia conducts more bilateral and multilateral military exercises with the US than with any of our other partners. 11 bilateral and 5 multilateral exercises annually. This helps to build critical capacity and readiness of our forces. Between 2018 to 2022, US security assistance exceeded $220 million, providing equipment, training, and other vital support. In addition, we engage in cooperative efforts to enhance, you say in the United States, enhance, to enhance maritime security and combat transnational menaces such as cybercrime, terrorism, violent extremism, and drug trafficking. These concerns surpass national boundaries, and their resolution necessitates collaborative effort that capitalizes on collective capacities. Malaysia has become a robust partner to the United States across spheres like education, climate change, public health, and empowering marginalized communities. But why should all this matter to the United States? At the core of Malaysia's global offering is an unmatched capacity to be a reliable partner on critical technologies. For over 50 years, Malaysia has been home to leading technology multinationals, particularly in electronics and semiconductors. Malaysia plays a pivotal role in the global tech industry, supplying 25% of the semiconductor components that power the United States technology demands. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Ford's production of the iconic F-150 pickup truck hinged crucially on Malaysia's decision to reopen its industrial operations. Half of all composite wing parts of Boeing and Airbus planes are made in Malaysia. We are also a vital link in medical technology supply chains, with nearly 300 companies employing 70,000 skilled workers. As strategic competition intensifies between the United States and China, Malaysia approaches relations with both pragmatically and judiciously. We will work with ASEAN to minimize risks, namely outright conflict or the bifurcation of the global economy into rigid blocks. Neither seems likely soon, but both have become plausible under today's mounting pressure. Recognizing contradictions will inevitably emerge. Malaysia still sees value in engaging both Washington and Beijing. America's economic dynamism, culture of innovation, and central role in underwriting regional stability will ensure it leads in many spheres for the foreseeable future. China will remain central to regional affairs due to its size, proximity, and deep linkages with Southeast Asia. As China's economy matures, it will shift emphasis from investment and exports towards the domestic consumption and services. Engaging both major powers provides us with more strategic space to advance our national interests. To my mind, this mantra applies across the board for Southeast Asia, although there will be shades of differentiation in the details. Turning to the more contentious South China Sea issue, Malaysia's position is rooted in enduring strategic and economic imperatives. We strongly oppose any actions undermining our territorial integrity or freedom of navigation. Unfettered sea lines of communication through the South China Sea are critical, as our nation would be bifurcated without them. Nevertheless, Malaysia believes in the power of diplomacy as the best tool for conflict resolution. We also rely heavily on oil and gas resources within our lawful exclusive economic zone, which accounts for up to 40% of government revenue, depending on commodity prices. And while periodic challenges arise, Malaysia has succeeded in pursuing a strategic partnership with China, enabling enhanced cooperation in areas like trade, investment, and tourism. There is no doubt that the continued US-China rivalry will be the structural reality in world affairs. Almost all major aspects of international relations will be shaped by this condition. Yet it will be too simple to reduce and boil everything down to just these two countries. Due to its size, growing confidence on the international stage, and highly influential culture, including Bollywood and global diaspora, India will figure increasingly prominently in global affairs. And despite the naysayers, it is never wise to bet against Japan, whose economy has regained some of its previous luster and demonstrating its sheer resilience. Prime Minister Kishida was just in Kuala Lumpur earlier this month, and I was pleased to welcome Japan's desire for more trade and defense cooperation with Malaysia. We also look forward to South Korea extending its role in stabilizing the broader Asia-Pacific. A confluence of many nations, each seeking a responsible role and stake in the region, will generate an equilibrium that will sustain peace and prosperity. Now, this is a time of profound disruption across all facets of international relations. As information technology reshapes societies everywhere, we have reached an unprecedented intersection between opportunity and risk. Malaysia has long been heralded as a beacon of moderation, demonstrating a harmonious balance between its rich Islamic heritage and modernity. Historically, Malaysia has navigated the complex waters of religious expression with a deft hand, allowing for a pluralistic society where different faiths coexist peacefully under the umbrella of a predominantly Muslim population. However, the ubiquity of social media platforms has ushered in new challenges. The digital age has allowed for the rapid dissemination of information, but it has also become a conduit for more intolerant ideologies to seep into the Malaysian discourse. These trains of thought, often rooted in a more rigid interpretation of Islam, have found fertile ground in the unregulated expanses of the online world. This phenomenon is not unique to Malaysia. It mirrors the rise of fascist right-wing elements in Europe and beyond. Careful, I didn't mention United States. Where misinformation campaigns have successfully amplified fringe views into mainstream consciousness. In the process, falsehood trumps truth, providing fodder to spin narratives founded on lies and deceit. Take the case of the web of duplicity and disinformation spun around the narrative on Malaysia's position on the current Palestinian-Israeli conflict. As I had declared in the Malaysian Parliament, there are no two ways about it. We condemn terrorism in all its forms, and we categorically condemn the actions of killing innocent lives and taking women and children as hostages. Likewise, we unequivocally condemn the bombings of civilians, of homes, of hospitals, and the consequential atrocities against innocent lives. Children, women, and men being carried out day and night in Gaza with impunity. These are blatant violations of international law. Malaysia views this as a humanitarian crisis, precipitated by brutal and indiscriminate war. Ultimately, this is not about which God we pray to. After all, the more than 11,000 victims in Gaza comprise Muslims and Christians, as well as nationalities of various countries. This is about preventing more death, more suffering, and more hate. Proponents of the Palestinian cause are neither purveyors of hate speech nor supporters of terrorism. Look at the historical antecedents. The position has been and has remained consistent. The voice of Gandhi, India, Einstein, here, Mandela, Africa, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X, all of them spoke courageously against colonization and politics of dispossession. My message today resonates with urgency as we stand here in Berkeley, not far from the technological epicenter that is Silicon Valley. Even in Malaysia, the forces of obscurantism are harnessing every novel technology and technique to disseminate falsehood. This burgeoning crisis is reaching a tipping point, signaling an impending need for government intervention and international cooperation to rein in the chaos. Tech companies, especially those that have flourished in the fertile ground in Silicon Valley, carry the crucial responsibility as custodians of modern communication. They are tasked with implementing policies that counter misinformation and disinformation while upholding the right to free speech. These platforms need to serve as conduits for constructive dialogue rather than channels for deceit and manipulation. Democracy, despite its flaws, remains our best hope, and its endurance depends on our collective vigilance and continuous improvement, echoing the dedication of those who came before us. And I see hope when I'm on university campuses. It is in bastions of learning where we are going to find solutions, or at least near solutions, to the complex problems that we face, where politics and deeply held beliefs intersect with technology. After all, it is on campuses like Berkeley that we have students who can decipher quantum physics equations while simultaneously advocating for climate change awareness. You are the experts at debating the intricacies of political philosophy, all while pondering the eternal question, is it too late to order pizza? But in all seriousness, the problems we face are not neatly confined to a single field of study. They cut across boundaries, demanding knowledge from multiple disciplines to unlock their secrets. So whether you are a physicist, a philosopher, an engineer, or a pizza enthusiast, remember that collaboration and the melding of diverse perspectives will be our greatest assets in finding the answers we seek. Walt Whitman once said, "Gratitude, anyhow, has never been made half enough of by the moralists. It is indispensable to a complete character, men's or women's, the disposition to be appreciative, thankful." I am deeply grateful for your engagement and consideration today, because my life has been somewhat turbulent. I expect fair questions. I've endured too much torture. Please don't add into my misery. I look forward to our path converging again as we labor in pursuit of our shared aspirations for prosperity and justice. Until then, let us each pledge to contribute to the others yet rewarding task of nurturing a world where truth prevails and democracy thrives. Thank you.
We had few institutions, now some people might say we have too many. How can these be fit together, and does Malaysia have a strategy to participate in all of these? And the United States is in some of them, but not others. What should Malaysia and middle powers do in that situation?
As an emerging economy, we integrate and we discuss among our neighbors, particularly in ASEAN, what is best for the region. And we, thus far, has engaged with almost all of these international organizations. But the problem remains, the fundamental issues again, the tendency to dictate issues that would benefit certain countries at the expense of others. WTO is an example. Now, concerns, of course, COP28. You always assume that what is decided by Washington, D.C. and London must be then generally accepted. We say, well, if you allow us to engage, then let us engage and see the peculiar circumstances and time that's needed for these countries to emerge successfully. Because we cannot follow the dictates and the narrative of certain countries. I refer to COP28, for example. They have not even honored the serious commitments given earlier, but they expect us to honor, and we have to struggle with this fact. Now, Malaysia cannot stand alone, so we'll have to have ASEAN and GCC, some other countries together to at least protect our turf.
So I'm now combining some of the questions that I've been reading. As you can see, there are only a few.
Yeah.
So one question has to do with China's role in the South China Sea, which you alluded to. And of course, this has created great tensions, concerns in many of the countries, liberal countries of Southeast Asia, including, of course, Vietnam, Philippines, and so on. Can ASEAN play a role here in trying to dissipate some of this conflict, control some of this conflict that many countries are worried about? China, and at the same time, the United States would like to have freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. How can Malaysia and, more broadly, ASEAN play a role in that situation?
Well, ASEAN did discuss. Our position is, ideally, we should take a multilateral regional position in this engagement with China. Malaysia as a country has not faced that problem, although the map was announced recently by China do infringe upon our territory or claim. But thus far, with China, we have been rather successful in terms of negotiating with the Chinese. I think the problem is more troublesome, more contentious with the Philippines and Vietnam. We are engaging with them too, but our position is make sure we remain as a regional problem, do not allow for interference of other countries, because that would further aggravate or exacerbate the crisis. So that's the position as insofar as the South China Sea is concerned. I must again reiterate the point that notwithstanding the pronouncements and the claim by various parties, we have not encountered real, I should say, skirmishes or problems. The solution, of course, an aggressive diplomatic engagement, and which we are continuing, even within ASEAN, as I said, with the Philippines and Vietnam, but together, ASEAN and China.
The APEC, for which you are here, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation meetings are taking place in San Francisco, and we in San Francisco are in the Bay Area very happy about that. On the other hand, many people say APEC stands for a poor excuse to chat. This is some Australian Prime Minister make fun of APEC. So, and there will be a chat tomorrow between President Xi and President Biden. So two questions, maybe the first one is, what do you expect to get out of this, or what do you think will take place from this bilateral discussion between Biden and President Xi? And more broadly, what does Malaysia hope to get out of the APEC meetings, given that APEC is not a decision-making body?
You see, never underestimate the importance of diplomacy, of engagement, of dialogue, of chats. And I therefore do not consider that meeting between President Biden and President Xi Jinping something just a normal sort of discourse. It is being looked upon not only by APEC countries, but the world. The engagement and resolution to some of the more not necessarily contentious problems of Gaza, Palestine, or Ukraine, Russia, but at least trade, investments, and understanding on these related issues will help instill more confidence into the economy, which is required by not only the United States and China, but most of these countries. There's no reason. I say Malaysia, the fundamentals are good. There is progress. You see this impressive growth. You have great support in terms of new investments from China, United States, Europe, and others. You see low inflation, under 2%. You see lower unemployment, under 4%. But still, the attack on the currency is severe. Not because the fundamentals were what Fed decides. And therefore, I think, and I believe that this sort of engagement is important. It is a good positive signal outcome of the dialogue or meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Biden. It would create more confidence that despite the differences, say, for example, on the issue of Arab-Israeli conflict and Ukraine, Russia, there are other issues that can be resolved, particularly in terms of trade investments. And that would probably give this additional impetus and confidence to investors. So I see in that. What we benefit? I mean, just that sort of arrangement of a more fruitful outcome of the meeting would provide that signal which is needed for these nations. Better improvement in the trade between states and China would mean immense benefit to countries in ASEAN, including Malaysia, because we do export to, it is a trading nation. It's 160% export from our initial fundamentals to, and also to China. So of course, in the detailed meetings, we do, because some of the issues of energy transition, digital transformation, food security, I mean, these issues are discussed, and not only to be decided by leaders, but they will be conveyed to the business community, which is very critical. The APEC meeting is not just meeting between our political leaders, but more so to involve greatly the private sector.
Please have some water. So like many countries who are reliant on oil exports, including the United States, we have to think about the question of continuing to produce and export oil in Malaysia. If I understand correctly from the questioner, it's about 20% of fiscal revenue. On the other hand, Malaysia has made a commitment, domestic commitment as well as international commitments to improve the environment and cut down on emissions. And you also have the Ekonomi Madani strategy. Could you tell us a little more about that strategy and also how you balance the competing needs of revenue from oil with climate concerns?
You know, in terms of our decision or policy to protect our both virgin diverse and forests, we have a 50% diverse and forest. You know, no way can be competed by most Western countries. Do not have that sort of capacity. And the CCUS is active even in terms of oil and gas. We now have this alternative of CCUS, carbon capture, quite effective at that. So, and our commitment in terms of energy transition remains. And I don't believe that this issue of the capacity, the need to continue to produce oil would be at the expense of our commitment in terms of energy transition and renewable energy. which has advanced considerably, both in the peninsular part and also in Sarawak. And our commitment among the ASEAN Asian countries, I think, is quite clear. There's clarity in terms of policy, and I don't foresee serious problems at that, because the commitment has been made, and we are working towards it, and quite clear, and we are subjected to international review and study. And we will, of course, honor that, and I think I will announce that clearly in the COP28 remarks.
Malaysia is an important technological power. You have semiconductors, you have a lot of high technology equipment, and as you know, everybody talks about AI all the time. Many of our students are now very good at writing their papers with AI. We're very concerned at Berkeley. These questions were not written by AI, but they could have been probably written by AI. Have you thought about what role Malaysia and other middle powers can play? Because the EU has their AI directive, the Americans now have passed some directives on AI. How does Malaysia see itself in that broader game of AI regulation and AI innovation?
Why do you ask me difficult questions? I thought the understanding was to give me some degree. Well, this is of course a very challenging issue. I mean, we talk about the new technology, new challenge of AI, it's a challenge of values. This has been discussed in the region, the sub-region of ASEAN, very active. And, but I must concede that we are not as advanced as we see, for example, in Europe or United States or even China. We've just set up, now towards the end of the year, a faculty, AI faculty, to undertake more studies, research, and compare with some of the institutions. I think among the leading emerging economies, the most prominent, of course, is CSI Artificial Intelligence University in Abu Dhabi. And we are, of course, trying to have more exchanges to learn from that experience. But, of course, it is a major issue. We require that technology, but we also have to deal with the negative impact of that technology, which do not worry me as much, although I represent the old generation, and most of my colleagues seem to be more worried. But I said, it's just the same pattern. When we started with Industrial Revolution, we had that concern too. And then with digital technology, with computers, major concern. I remember there was a time when we just started, I had to bring to, and there was massive reaction, negative reaction among many of our villagers, because they thought that all these sins and pornography would be there. So I had to bring some of this new gadget to the mosque. And it's an interesting experience, because then I said, what verse of the Quran do you want? Number verse what? Surah 3, verse 14. Okay, then they said, this is miraculous. You want to have the Quranic reference to justice? You tell me that immediately. So it's through that sort of child education that they realize that it's not just about sins and pornography. I think the same issue with AI, finally, is an issue of the individual and the family, in terms of values, in terms of character, in terms of their belief in what is right, and basically education which is terribly lacking, and that is also a challenge. I mean, of course, you're familiar with Louis' Excellence Without a Soul, but there's, of course, more social concerns and political concerns. But I think dealing with AI, you need also to extend to the issue of humanity, of compassion, of good values. Because that by itself is more effective than imposing all these rules. Most governments, including mine, talk about new laws, new restrictions, which I think would have lots of limitations and would curtail the advancement of this AI. But the way out is supposed to instill that sort of confidence, but sense of values that covers the issue of humanity or humanitarian ideals, which is not unfamiliar. You talk about Jeffersonian ideals. It's very close to these issues. I mean, Xi Jinping is talking about civilization and understanding, and the Indian philosophy or the Islamic philosophy is with that. But that's to be lacking. Our rancorous exchange is where we differ in terms of the political differences that we have, not to instill issues of, I think, humanity, humanitarian ideals. You read Tocqueville's Democracy in America. He talks about habits of the heart. It's quite absent in most democratic societies. Habits of the heart is the issue of sense and your belief in justice and compassion, in humanity, in truth, in what is right. I think this needs to be instilled. And if this can be instilled as a popular move, AI is not a challenge.
That's good. Well, you mentioned democracy, and in a recent interview with the Council on Foreign Relations, you said you need to work with the dominant party and have compromise in maintaining a democracy. I know it's bad for leaders to give advice to other countries like the United States, but maybe you could talk a little bit about how you see the need to compromise and what other countries might learn from the Malaysian approach.
Enough problems. Who can solve? I mean, what is concerning I see, as a firm believer in democracy, we used to see America's beacon, hope of democracy, which unfortunately is, not to say no longer there, but people are getting a bit more cynical because the bifurcation and rancor and division is so clear, and the divide and issue of identity politics, of growing fascism and white supremacy, which to me really tragic as a firm believer in democracy and struggle, survive more than 10.5 years in prison, and suddenly see this because, well, is this hopeless? Not necessarily. I think probably this is a period that is most challenging. Hopefully after this battle, like things will evolve, and probably, hopefully the younger generation will insist upon a new America based on the ideals of this great nation. I'm sorry, this is not, I should say, trying to advise. I mean, I was a small country, and I've learned and benefited immensely from the scholarship here and exchanges, particularly when during the years at Georgetown University. But then I would say that this is, of course, a difficult period. You see, when I was much younger, we do look up to America as although issue of hegemony, of imperialism, new imperialism was there, but at least there was a beacon of hope, of ideals, of democratic accountability. Now, nobody outside the United States talk about those things when in reference to the United States. It's really unfortunate. You can see the debates full of rancor and preaching intolerance and hatred of the others. I mean, this is 2023, and you're back the exchanges which are far worse than what it was before. And this is, of course, as it concerns, as a firm believer in democracy, we have taken the United States as a great friend. And this is something, hopefully, but I have great hopes in the future that among the young. And the challenge, of course, among the young. And it's the same with Malaysia. I'm not saying that we are completely absorbed from this sort of issues. No. We have also forms of extremism, religious extremism, chauvinism, which is a real tough battle to overcome. I mean, many students here from Malaysia, they're Malays, they're Chinese, ethnic Indians, and from different regions, including Sabah, Sarawak. You know how difficult it is. Because the appeal, the identity politics is so appealing. Our race, our survival, the others are going to Christianize us, the others are going to take over our country. In the next 20 years, the Malays and the Muslims will be wiped out. Simple rhetoric like that, which is appealing to some. So it's in the era of ignorance. But they require lots of courage, struggle, and pain to try and overcome this insanity and madness.
So in the United States, we have lots of debates about affirmative action. In Malaysia, you've had a Bumi Putra policy for a very long time. How do you think the Bumi Putra policy is likely to evolve over the next, say, 10 to 20 years?
Well, I've seen this debate about the bell curve, Cornel West and the other, this debate, fair. You see, affirmative action programs are necessary for the poor, for the marginalized. It need not be necessarily race-based. It must be need-based. But that's where I shift a bit, you see, in terms of our traditional policy. Why do we need to continue? Because I think Sandel, who is Harvard professor, he talks about meritocracy. Yeah. Is such a meritocracy fair? If you talk about competition between Berkeley and Georgetown, but you talk about Berkeley and Georgetown, one's a remote university or school in Africa, there's no justice. As Rawls alluded to, John Rawls, justice as fairness. It's not just fair, just not to give equality to everyone. Some countries, some schools, even in Malaysia, some schools, urban schools, have the best facilities. You have to compete with some remote school in the heartland, rural heartland. There must be some form of additional assistance. You call it affirmative action, you call it additional support, but you cannot have purely meritocracy when there is no fairness. There's no justice in this regard. So I think, to my mind, we have to continue with very serious, effective program to eradicate poverty, to allow for the marginalized and the poor communities to be able to come up and compete. But there have been a lot of wastages. There's also psychological build-up there. There is the dependency syndrome. There are issues that we have to discuss, yes. But we must allow for a fair competition. We cannot speak purely of meritocracy when we do not provide basic fair opportunities for particularly the poor and the marginalized. The only difference, I repeat, is based on need. We are poor, you are poor. You can be a Malay or Chinese or Indian. You are poor, you are poor. We deal with you as the issue of poverty, not race-based. Must be need-based. But a lot of issues, I think, we discussed in that bell curve, which we have to take into consideration because we cannot allow for the society to be totally dependent as you call it, is dependency syndrome that the Egyptian economist Ceramah Umum referred to.
So we had talked a little bit about democracy and AI, and you mentioned in your own speech disinformation. And I think this is a problem that many countries confront in Europe, in the United States, and also maybe in Malaysia. So is ASEAN able to do something? Are you able to do something to combat disinformation in local languages that could undermine democracy, and a lot of these fake videos which have become very popular? How are you thinking about dealing with that problem?
Well, you know what, that's why I made reference to the issue of values. There must be at least some basic understanding on what is good, what is right. Again, in reference to habits of the heart, the issue of justice, you're correct, right? But because of the propensity, the incessant propaganda and use of these social media that promotes fake and fear, of course that's concerning. And how do you regulate them is also a major challenge. There have been discussions within ASEAN. I don't think we can come up with a very formula. We overreact and it becomes too condescending, or to the state then takes it upon itself to regulate, and they can be also excesses because it depends on the state. If the state is a corrupt state, authoritarian leaders, then you do it at the expense of democracy and freedom. So it is a very challenging enterprise to try and not to regulate, but at least to have some sort of understanding among all parties to limit. Like, for example, child pornography, we say nobody agrees, so fair, that's clear. If you do it, then you will be punished. But otherwise, where the line is not clearly drawn, there has to be intensive discussions and debate on what needs to be regulated. After going through years of imprisonment and under very authoritarian rule, have great difficulty in accepting just government intrusion into these affairs unless it is clearly established and generally accepted by the public.
There's a questioner who asks, is there something being done by the government to encourage Malaysians to come back to Malaysia, as the Chinese have created various programs, and the Indians have done that to some extent as well, especially the non-Bumi population, which constitute the majority of Malaysians abroad. Are you creating some programs to encourage them to come back and start companies and the like as part of your economic strategy?
Well, the good news is that some are beginning to come back. You see, this is not just what perks that they can have. It's the general confidence. Is the government fair? Is it just? Is it just? Is it willing to accommodate all sectors of the community? We have given, at least in the new administration, just barely 1 year now, I've seen so much enthusiasm. I'm meeting some of them here. Many Malaysians have been quite successful. Well, I do feel strong with it. Not all need to come back. They can serve, and they should send money back. You can contribute. For example, the traditional view is that once you graduate, either as PhD or Masters, you must come back and serve. Right? I propose some change. Let them have the initial exposure. If some more private companies, private enterprise, startups wants to employ them, let them have it. it is here, San Francisco, the Bay Area, or in New York, you have that exposure. You will have immense help and benefit to the country when they come back. Or if you decide not to, then we say, please, do send more funds to your parents. But seriously, we have a team now in the cabinet to see what's happening in some other countries, and we're going to advise people to come back. But that will also be together with the how the economy is being managed. And you know, Malaysia is interesting thing which referred to earlier by the and based on the study made by the CG, Boston Consulting Group. We were doing relatively better in the 1990s, and then you compare to Vietnam, Indonesia, some level, and Thailand, they have gone up. We have stagnated somewhat for about 20 years. Yes, there's growth, there's development, but I'm talking about sustainable economic development assessment, growth, investments, health, education. Sustainable economic development assessment proves that we have somewhat stagnated. Now we have to undertake real reforms, tough measures to ensure that the greater confidence the economy can be propelled. Malaysia is one country in Asia that gives the largest amount of subsidy. It's 81 billion ringgit, $20 billion for subsidy. It's not tenable, it's not sustainable. So who dare withdraw subsidy? Your economists say, brilliant idea, but you lose elections. So now we are fortunate, it's a strong government, relatively strong. Now, you can withdraw subsidy, but make sure you are able to compensate for the very poor, give them cash transfers to at least not to put them in a more difficult condition, economic condition. But we can't. Right now, for example, our decision to withdraw subsidy for electricity, we just withdraw for the top 10%. Can you imagine? The top 10% in Malaysia use 50% of the subsidy for the poor. I mean, that's been tolerated for decades. Now we have done that. Of course, I can afford to be unpopular with the top 10%, but hopefully the 90% still support me. Now from there, we talk about other measures now. We spent about, and through that, the saving is 4 billion ringgit a year. Now, we've just imposed this withdrawal of subsidy for chicken. Can you imagine? We spent 1 billion ringgit a year to subsidize chicken. And it benefits everybody, including the richest men in the country would eat the subsidized chicken, which is a disgrace to the economy. You should support and subsidize the poor. No. So we have done so. Fortunately, the price has not, gone up. We'll be able to sustain at the same level. But we save 1 billion ringgit a year. But these are unpopular measures, tough measures, but it has to be done to save the economy. And we will do it, including petrol and some other measures. But we see just before elections, we'll stop.
So we're nearing the end, and I think we've been asking you very simple questions, so I thought I'd ask you some more difficult questions. So here's a question: what is your favorite Malaysian food, since you've been speaking about chickens?
Satay.
Okay. What is your favorite song by Siti Nurhaliza? In my politics of South Asia, I learned that this artist is very important.
The Siti Nurhaliza is, of course, icon. And fortunately, supporting us, and she did sing a few songs For the elections, this is saying something. If you were Aziz about the Kasih, Wanita. This is a good song. I mean, more support of women.
So the last question, which is very easy for you to answer. There are so many colleges around here, including some inferior ones in the South Bay. It chose me to ask this question since I went to Stanford, sorry. Why did you pick Berkeley?
I have been to UCLA, Berkeley, Stanford, and some close associates in these universities. But, yeah, why Berkeley? You want an honest answer or critical answer?
Honest is good.
Speak from your heart. Very happy.
Because of my tendency to speak with the heart, that's why I was in prison. You express what you feel and you go into trouble. No, but frankly, to issue, of course, I consider UC Berkeley is a great university. I had some experience in the past, exchanging. Unlike today, I read the question, but in the exchanges with the students, it's quite vibrant, and I was quite impressed with that. But for the second reason, of course, is closer to the hotel I'm staying.
Very honest. I think it's time to give the Prime Minister a hand for answering all